Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we are still exceedingly grateful that you're here with us at the Jorgensen Learning Center to learn a little bit about how we at JLC, Colleen, who's online with me, Deb, and myself, how we kind of see leadership unfolding and truly evolving in this 21st century. So this particular session is actually going to be leading in the 21st century, and keep yourselves, focused on what are your personal leadership values that you're either reinforcing or possibly developing some new ones, and then what will be your operating principles, how you intend to show up in the world with those that you lead. I think that's really a significant edge. And remember, leadership in 3 dimensions: yourself, upwards, sideways, and then among those that you actually are given the opportunity to lead. So the 3 directions: self, upward, sideways, and after those 3 dimensions are taken care of, then think about how to teach the same thing to those that you lead, so that each person you lead can lead themselves first, upward to you, and sideways to peers. So this sense of a three-dimensional leadership is really all about this work we've been doing so far together. And keep focused on developing your operating principles. This is session 3, personal responsibilities of leadership. And at some level, I want to make sure that you're clear that these are responsibilities that seem to be useful, and that where we've seen our clients and where we've practiced these responsibilities ourselves, we've had positive results as a result of practicing these responsibilities. In fact, as we go through the learning, I'm sure you'll find opportunity to notice when I have lost my way because I forgot to practice them. So that, I think, will be fun and interesting for us moving forward. And at the end of this, you'll each know what's going on in terms of your own personal responsibilities, very specific responsibilities around leading and making sure I'm paying attention to myself in my own development. So, Colleen, what are we working on today? What are you hearing? What are you thinking?
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that I'm working on kind of my own personal responsibilities of leadership, and not that they're dreary or cumbersome from that perspective or that light, but just how can I bring my best and continue to develop myself as I go through my leadership journey.
Yeah, and I love the picture, although the picture does make me feel weary at some level. And because, my training is so classical, I think about the myth of Sisyphus, where I shove this huge boulder up the hill, and at the end of the day, when I finally finish it and get it up to the top of the hill, it just rolls back down again, and I do it again. I don't want to be thinking about myself like that, or about like Atlas, because I do think these responsibilities are much more enjoyable, much more fun, and much more developmental. Deb, what are you thinking and hearing and thinking and listening to right now?
Well, I'm thinking a lot about some of the words I heard you and Colleen share, which is how you show up in the world and the intention around that. How do you intend to show up? So a thoughtful presence, and the 3 dimensions of self, upward, and sideways. And I love the practicing of the disciplines. I too have spent much of my time practicing with you, Dr. Ray, and some of the time not practicing. And you can certainly tell the difference when I practice. I think that just leads me to know it's always going to be a journey. It's not a once and done, or it's not a multiple times and done. So I'm looking forward to the next hour or so with you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Deb. You made me think about my own learning journey right now. Ruby, my wife, is a really good golfer. She plays golf very well, and she's only really started playing about three and a half years ago. So of course I've gone to golf outings, but I never tried to play. So all of a sudden I'm trying to play. Holy cow. It is such a responsibility to keep these disciplines alive and not build a new picture of myself that I don't want, but a picture of enjoying the game of golf. And I love this phrase: golf is something that you play, it's not something that you win. And I like that. And I think leadership is a journey. It's something that we participate with. It is not necessarily an endpoint. Now I'm a leader. I think we are always developing. So, Deb, thank you so much for that. That was so, so useful. Well, let's move forward and continue our practice. Our practice is to just take a quick moment, and for each of you, if you don't mind, let me know from your leadership and learning section when we were talking about becoming a learning leader. And I love the getting the ducks in a row piece too. What does it mean to be a learning leader? So if you each could give me one or two of your significant learnings from that section, I think that'll be a nice segue into this new work. So do you mind starting, Deb?
Thank you, Ray. I think the key thing for me, significant learning, was as a learning leader to create, to design, to be able to design, I'm going to say, the structure for your team to become learning communities. So that was very interesting to me from session 2.
Beautiful. And that, I think, is, we will eventually talk more deeply about that, but one of the real practices in leadership is design work. What am I going to design in order to accomplish the desired future state or the results that we want? That was really great, Deb. Thank you. Colleen, what was one of yours?
What really resonated with me was similar to Deb's. It was this concept of co-creating the future and how that feels so different than, if you're not co-creating the future, then you're almost pulling them to this new vision or this new desired future state, and how that then shifts the relationship back to that force and leadership and force. So really this sense of leaders and how can I be very intentional with my conversation in co-creating the future with my team or whomever I'm working with versus pulling them or pushing them towards that new desired future state.
Oh, Colleen, that was beautiful. Remembering this idea of transformation is about co-creation. And you've already hit upon something that will happen in session 4, where we actually talk about the difference between motivated by fear and motivated by aspiration. And of course, when I'm trying to co-create a future that we all agree upon, that's aspirational in nature. And the power that comes from that and the intention, I think, that comes from that is absolutely critical. Beautiful. Thank you both for kind of getting us there. Ladies and gentlemen at home, grab your learning journal and take about, say, 90 seconds or 2 minutes, and I'll come back to you after you get a chance. Of course, you control your time, so take a couple of minutes and do yourself, write down what were some of your significant learnings from session 2, becoming a learning leader. We'll be back to you in just a few moments. It's where we see something a certain way and we really do believe other people should see it the same way. And unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that way. So we're going to come about that sense of working on our own ability to see things. And this has to do with learning to lead yourself first. So one of the greatest gifts I think I ever received from a teacher was when a coach of mine said to me, once you think you have, quote, the answer, end quote, take a deep breath and try and find other people who see things differently. So this sense of leading is truly about working on me first. How do I think about this differently? And what led me to quite disappointed in my sureness. So let's just talk for a second about that learning to lead self first, about being sure. Colleen, much for being part of us again. And again, want to remind you how grateful we are that you've chosen to be part of this work. So this piece today is about leadership and communication, and at some level, it's about how we communicate with self. And the idea of leading myself first is critical. So today's session is going to really help us notice how we come to conclusions and how sometimes what we think is so, and we're so sure it's so, tends not to be. So we will work on these 3 personal responsibilities of leading that will allow us to really lead ourselves exceedingly well. That way we don't jump to conclusions, don't decide we're right too quickly. And I want to say very, very, very in an honoring way that there are some situations where you just act. I think many of you know I've worked with the military before. And when they're in a dangerous situation, they need to act. They need to take care of whatever it is that's going on right in front of them. I have worked with Marines, Navy, Army, and when somebody opens fire on you, you don't need to have a meeting. You need to respond. You need to follow your protocols and follow the hierarchy. Follow leadership's hierarchy to make sure that you respond immediately and everyone's safe. Now, once we're out of that environment, that's when the military calls them AAR, after action reviews, really matter. So today we're going to become better and better at after action reviews for ourselves more than anything else. So Deb, Colleen, what are you thinking about that?
I'll go ahead and start. You know, I wrote down some notes here just talking about the responsibilities of leading, and you know, how you talked about not jumping to conclusions, finding others who see things differently, so truly entertaining differing perspectives. And I think that's just a kind of a paradigm shift and a shift in our thinking, because many times, you know, we want to come with the answer, we want to act, and so we're so conditioned just to come in and either fix or act in some way. And I really like the concept of not jumping to conclusions, suspending certainty, inviting others, and especially differing perspectives, so I can continue to really enhance the information before I make my own decision.
Colleen, that's great. Sometimes there's more data available, and as long as we take a deep breath and we ask for that help, I'll get more information. And again, I want to remind everybody, there are moments in our lives when the fire is burning that we need to put the fire out. It's when that fire is out that we can have that other kind of conversation and say, how can we respond to that fire more effectively next time? Or in the case of my military friends and truly friends and colleagues that I've worked with, how do we respond to that firefight more effectively the next time? I mean, this is just wonderful work about, in the moment, we need to behave, and then we need to be able to have a methodology to reflect well. Thank you so much, Colleen. Deb, where are you right now on this?
I'd like to build a little bit more on the after-action review, and as you said, the methodology. I love the concept of not only like a team after-action review, so we can get the best thinking after the, quote, crisis has passed, but I love the idea of reflecting just myself sometimes on an after-action review, like I did X, whatever action I took or whatever I might have said, and then just really reflect for a little bit as, you know, how effective was that? You know, did I use my best thinking, or if not, what might I do the next time, or just kind of unpack the situation a little bit and reflect on my own behavior, thoughts, and words.
Deb, that is just terrific. You know, there's a song that Miley Cyrus has redone, although she's getting a funny reputation these days. But she just redid a Bob Dylan song. The name of it is "You're Gonna Miss Me." You're gonna make me lonesome when you're gone. It's a great Dylan song, written in the '60s, I believe, and she redid it, and it's a good piece. And in it, there's one line near the end of it that says, that after things don't go the way I want them to, I'm going to give myself a good talking to. And I think about that as being a learning leader, that I sometimes need to give myself a good talking to. Look, what are you doing this for? You're acting crazy. What's wrong with you? And it is all of whatever happened to me to bring me to this point in my life so far that makes me react sometimes in ways that are not effective. And I get it. So I love that Dylan metaphor about giving yourself a good talking to. Sometimes I just need to do that. And I think that's all part of learning to lead well. You know, and of course, not spending too much time in deep criticism. So I don't want to attack my self-worth. I prefer to attack my self-esteem. Like, okay, you didn't do that correctly. Okay, let's figure out how to do it more effectively the next time. Am I connecting with you on this, Deb?
No, absolutely. And I think sometimes if we don't watch our thinking, or if we don't notice our thinking, we tend to be very externally focused on something somebody else should have done differently. And so it really, at least for me, it needs to be really intentional to turn that mirror back and spend some reflective time. But I'm going to have to listen to that Miley Cyrus song.
Oh, it's just a great song. And I love that sense of turning the mirror back on me. Otherwise, I start thinking that that person should have done something. Mm-hmm. And then I start to violate our principles in conversational leadership. One of our biggest ones that appears in our first book is not wanting things for others, but working on myself first. And I think that's all part of this conversation. So, but I definitely give myself a good talking to on a regular basis. Colleen, want to weigh in on this before we move on?
Yeah, I also was just thinking when you said turning the mirror back, I think sometimes if we don't, we slip quickly into judgment as well. So just a good reminder as well when you turn that mirror back, turn it back first before you slip into judgment, because sometimes it's so easy to go there.
Oh, yeah, it is. And I guess this is a great time to remind everybody that we work with, if I'm in judgment of someone else's behavior and I'm not happy with it, one of the things that was like cold water in my face was when somebody said to me this sentence: if you see something negative in another person, you could only see it if you couldn't see it if it didn't live in you. You couldn't see it if it didn't live in you. So somehow I have to recognize that that behavior that I see over there in that person that I'm not happy with, the only way I could actually see that would be if it lived in me. Now, I may have dealt with it, I may have moved on, but it had to be inside of me in order for me to recognize it. There's a great story about Native Americans that my wife told me once when we were, in relationship and learning to be with each other and trying to understand each other's cultures. And I think some of you know that Ruby is a Native American. One of the most fascinating stories was that when the Nina Pinta and Santa Maria arrived here in North America, soon to become these United States, the Indians came to see them. And as they came to see them and tried to figure out who these strangers were, because they didn't understand them, there was a medicine man that had to go down to the water and stare at the water. And the story was he stared at the water for days before he could see the ships. Because something like a ship that in their minds, they weren't very big really by our standards today, but in their minds they were very big, and they were floating on this big body of water. Nobody could see the ships. They could see disturbances in the air, they could see water movement, but it was the shaman, the medicine man, that went and sat there for days until he could see it. And then once he could see it, he helped everyone else in the tribe see it. Well, sometimes I can't see something and I need help. And that's that sense of, if it doesn't live in me, if I haven't seen something like this before, it's very difficult for me to see it in the future. Colleen, how does that little story land on you?
Yeah, I was just visualizing sitting there and looking out and just imagining, sometimes we have no context, right? Going back to PPK, they had no PPK about what a boat looks like, and because they had no context, sometimes we have nothing to grasp because we have no prior experience around this piece. And I think that's so important when you're introducing new ideas or new concepts as you're leading. Just talking about being intentional with that conversation is if it's absolutely, if someone has never had that experience, you really enter into a conversation in a different way versus someone who is very well versed in that conversation. And I think golf, perhaps with you and Ruby, would be a good example of that.
Yeah, if I don't know what it feels like to hit a good shot, I don't know what it feels like.
Exactly.
That's great, Colleen. And Colleen, beautiful connectivity to the sense of PPK and context. Sometimes in a meeting, people really don't understand why we're even talking about this, and they can't see the ships. They can't see the ships. Somebody could actually put the ships up on a PowerPoint, but because they have no understanding, no meaning in them about why it is we're talking about something, no context, I can't build my PPK. I cannot build my practical knowledge nor my understanding, which is a precursor to practical knowledge, unless I have this contextual understanding. I can't see it. It's not in me. I can't see it. That is magnificent, and I will tell you a little internal story from one of my clients. One of my clients, the chairman of the CEO, said to a small group, we talk about an idea for months. Then we ask somebody else to talk about it for a few weeks. Then we ask somebody else to talk about it for a few days. Then we send it out to the field and we ask them to talk about it for a minute. How could we possibly expect that they would understand the larger context about why these ideas are big and important to the company? Isn't that interesting? Deb, what are you thinking right now?
Oh, Ray, I'm very familiar with that that concept, obviously. And I think my thoughts were, I guess I almost got hooked, if you will, on when you talked about the shaman coming out and the medicine man, and I guess the team or the tribe using him and his, I guess, power of vision, powers of observation. So that I kind of got hooked there, thinking to myself, okay, how do we as a community leverage certain people that we either perceive have powers, and then how do you enhance those? I mean, how did he eventually enhance his power of observation? And I was also just really intrigued about the fact that he may have stayed there for days, meaning it might not even, for someone who practices this, it may not be readily observable. And so kind of to stay with those thoughts for a while.
Oh, that is so great. And I've got to tell you something, Deb, that this is personal between you and I because Colleen did not experience this. One of the more obstreperous people that we've ever worked with, very gregarious, a lovely human being at the deepest level, but very judgmental, etc. When they first were invited into this work, were extremely cantankerous, didn't want to play, what is this nonsense, blah, blah, all the most interesting phrases, right, came out of this human being's mouth. In fact, far more colorful than that. But eventually, he said to the two of us, you know what you two are? You're like the old Indian guides that the YMCA used to run. You are standing on the side, pointing things out to us as we move along our conversation. And at some level, I think that's what we as JLC facilitators do. That's what we attempt to do. Point things out as we're moving along, trying to accomplish results. And Deb, I know you know who I'm talking about. We won't name him. But at the same time, don't you recall that particular situation? And this connects to our conversation today.
Absolutely. I call those Helen Keller moments, if you remember the story of Helen Keller. And she's at the well, and for that very, split second, it all connects. That, the finger spelling that they're doing into her hand actually means what she's touching at that point, or it has, it has a whole different meaning. And so it kind of light bulbs go on, or you get excited. And you're right. Those are lovely, lovely moments in our lifetime.
The guide on the side sometimes can help do that, and that's what Helen Keller had. And that's why I told that Sumerian story, that was the beginning of our writing environment. And the same experience happened for people that were sighted. Not for people that were unsighted, but actually sighted people ran into the same thing and continue to. I can't tell you how many times I've been at a meeting and said, oh my God, I never thought of that before. It's almost like this lightning strike hits you and go, that's different. Becoming a learning leader. Colleen, where are you? And we'll move on.
Oh, I'm just reflecting on your story, and I really like that concept of you talked about how we're learning facilitators, right? We just kind of hang out a little bit and point things out that sometimes people that haven't noticed, right? Yeah. So it's just, but once again, it's almost going back to that design, teach, and steward concept. We're really just trying to teach and steward learning as we roll along, and by intentional design, right? By intentional design.
Yes. Yes. Oh, Colleen, that's beautiful, because if we design well enough, PPK will grow. I just think that's just really good. Final thoughts on this one, Deb?
Oh, I think I think at this point I don't have any additional final thoughts, but I thought it was a great conversation.
Thank you so much. This is a great conversation. Let's move along. This next part, ladies and gentlemen, is about thinking about nature and how the world occurs to us in leadership. And I know many of you are used to industrial models. Let's rally the troops. Let's get the gang together. Let's get these guys and ladies focused. Let's make this group do this. Let's hurry forward. Let's, marshal our resources. That language is all industrial and military. Let's galvanize our team. That's what it is, and I have no problem with that. I still use that language. I drift into it because it's so natural, and it has, for me, that was the lens by which I saw the world as a young man, as a boy, and as a young adult. And that's a lot of big-time learning experience for us. So as I talk about the world, I will still drift into metaphors, similes, analogies that are military and industrial in nature. And what I'm inviting you to do moving forward here is to think a little bit about a garden. And if you think about a team that you've been asked to lead, or if you're a teacher who has a classroom filled with children, I would invite you to think about what does each of those individuals need to actually be successful in terms of resources. Well, in a garden, you know, what that, I don't know flowers, but what the red flowers need is different than what the blue flowers need, or the pink or the yellow, and I don't see colors so well, so I'm sure there's more colors. But everything out there needs something a little different in terms of nutrient resource. And this sense of development is really, really critical so that we can help people find what they need in order for them to bloom, blossom, become all they possibly can be. With that said, I want to add one more little concept here that's really important to me from a gentleman that I studied with at MIT. His name was Otto Scharmer. And Otto said all the time that he grew up on a farm in Germany, and that his dad used to always say, what part of the farm is most important? So I'm going to say to you, what part of this garden is most important? And Otto's dad, and Otto, and now Ray, would say to you, the most important part is the topsoil. If we don't have rich topsoil, can't grow the garden very effectively. In fact, we could put great seeds out there and they would struggle to grow. And there's many, many, many biblical references to this, as well as other faith books have incredible references to this. I found this in the Middle East, reading about Al-Farar, that the same kinds of references were in place. So you've got to put seeds in a place where they will grow. Where will they grow? When the topsoil is right. So for us here at Jorgensen Learning Center, JLC, and certainly the three of us that are on this call right now, the topsoil for us, relationships. When the relationships are working well, meaning the space is safe for people to talk, people feel honored and cared for, we mutually care for each other's success. When those operating principles, leadership operating principles, are in play, people can grow and develop. And they will grow and develop in a way that is useful for them, but also useful for the team and useful for the enterprise. So we're talking about thinking as leaders about developing a garden, not marshaling the troops, not galvanizing our resources, not attacking the competitor. Develop the garden. And it is a very different way, because as you know, when gardens are robust and strong, they will move other parts of the garden away. So in terms of the, this kind of world where we are concerned with our competitors, or we want to make sure that we are maintaining our level of market domination or market intervention, we will move competition away simply by developing our garden and making it as strong as it possibly can be. Keeping in mind, topsoil enables growth. Relationships enable development. Colleen, I'll throw it to you first. What are you thinking right now?
I guess I was just thinking, kind of what you focus on grows, and how as even coaches. I was thinking about coaches, even leaders. Yeah, you're looking at the competition, especially entrepreneurs, small business people, even coaches. Many times they're focused on winning, attacking, being better than the competitor. Where are their strengths? Where are their weaknesses? And I think when you were chatting, that's kind of the space I went to, and I continue to think about, what you focus on grows. If I'm focusing over there or always looking in the rearview mirror, I'm not paying attention to myself and where I'm going. And so I think that a critical, from my perspective, a critical thing is, once again, it's that sense of awareness of self. So to keep my focus on my topsoil and on my garden, so I am developing my capacity as a learner, and my students' capacity as a learner, my teammates' capacity as a learner, so we can work together, be our best individually as well as collectively. And now we're going to do an amazing job as far as attacking the competition. That will come, and it will come once we develop and grow ourselves.
I got to tell you, one of my most heartwarming stories about this came from a man who he's passed. Would never have known my name, never knew who I was, would never recognize me in a crowd or in a picture. Oh, I heard him speak a couple of times, and by hearing him speak, what I really heard were his kids speaking. And that was John Wooden, who was the coach of UCLA. And one of my friends from New York City, from Brooklyn actually, asked his kids a question, and he actually asked Coach Wooden a question. He says, but he kind of posed it through the kids, and he said, tell me, what does Coach Wooden say to you guys about winning? To your point, Colleen, attacking the competition or whatever it is we need to do, right? What does Coach Wooden say to you guys about winning? These kids, for the first time in the whole presentation, were confused, and they huddled up. There were 4 of them. They started talking to each other. Then they asked the coach something. He just shook his head, and I didn't say a word. The same kid came back to the microphone, and he said, we just talked about it, and we don't think Coach Wooden ever talks to us about winning. So the winningest coach in the United States of America never talks to you about winning. What does he talk to you about? Was the next question that somebody else asked. And that kid went right back to the mic. Oh, he tells us to play the next ball to the best of our ability. Notice he doesn't want you trapped in the past, stuck, commiserating with yourself about why you missed a layup, why you didn't get a rebound, none of that. What he asked people to do was to play the next ball to the best of your ability. For me, when I work with people that have office fronts, take the next phone call to the best of your ability. Build that relationship to the best of your ability. Hold the next meeting to the best of your ability. Otherwise, we will drift into that constant competition with self, and we end up in strange places. And as I look at this garden, I don't think the rose is saying, oh, I've got to do better growing tomorrow. I think they just keep growing. I think they just take the nutrients, take the resources, and develop. So I think the metaphor, the analogies that are possible here in this context of a garden is really, it's just fascinating. Colleen, that was magnificent. Thank you. Deb, what are you thinking?
Oh, gosh, Ray, I've got a lot of thoughts here. One quick thing about the gardening is an individual I'd known a few years ago said something that I thought was brilliant. He said, everybody loves a wonderful gardener. But you know what a garden has to, he said everybody loves a wonderful garden, but do you know what a garden has to have? And I'm thinking to myself, well, flowers and, trees and bees and stuff. And he said, no, every garden must have a gardener.
That's
great. But sometimes we don't necessarily like to do, I'll call it the tending and the work. But I hear you saying that, in this case, the work, and it's not work, it's joy, is the relationships. But it takes, in my opinion, time and energy and thoughtfulness to continue to build those relationships. I'm sure Coach Wooden, thought a lot about how he related to each of his players and what he said and what he was not going to say. So I love that Coach Wooden story, because to me about this next ball, it really is, I'm thinking about being fully present in the moment and being very intentional about how you show up. And I know, Dr. Ray, you talk about that a lot, and it's something I think about a lot as well, is how will I show up and model, I guess, for people that intentional being fully present behavior rather than, just kind of staying in my mind or to your point, thinking about the past, I woulda, shoulda, or thinking about the future, I need to do.
Yeah.
So, again, something I always work on, but very, very valuable time.
Deb, I love the idea of the gardener, and I actually see you as a gardener. I've watched you work for years, nurturing people. And what I love about this notion that Sharma gives us, that the best thing the gardener can do is provide the right nutrients so the topsoil stays rich. And I think that's really interesting. And if you notice all the different flowers, I'll tell you another cute little John Wooden piece. He was interviewed on a documentary, and he said, well, tell me about your standards for your players. What are your standards for your players? And he looked at the guy and he says, I have 12 sets. And the interviewer was completely confused. And he said, we're talking about 12 sets. He said, well, that's all the number of kids they let me have on my team is 12. So I have one set of standards for each one. And this blew the interviewer away. Like, what? Most coaches show up, here are my standards, here are my expectations for all of you. And his sense that individuals need different attention and different focus. And back to Colleen's comment, what you focus on grows. That was, for me, another boom opening, like holy cow. And it led me to a sentence I've used over and over again now in these last decades. The most unequal thing is the equal treatment of unequals. People need different things. Isn't that phenomenal? I mean, just everything just unfolds as we start to talk. Final thoughts on this one, Colleen, and we'll move on.
Just when you mentioned that, my thoughts moved to education. That's all. And I think many times we treat students by design and many times by the system. But that's when you said the most unequal thing, when you said that statement, is the treating of equals equally, or however you so eloquently put it. That's what surfaced in me.
Thank you. It for me, I just remember so many instances where people said, I want to be treated the same as the next guy, and I'm thinking, no, you don't. Or I would even say it to somebody, I want to be treated just like everybody else. No, I don't. I want to be treated like Ray. I want to have some unique engagement with you as my leader, with you as my gardener, with you as my coach, however I want to describe you, you as my colleague, you as my friend. I mean, I want to be seen as myself. So this is really a big deal when we think about leadership and providing that kind of relationship topsoil for people so that they can move on should they choose to. Back to it's invitational in nature. It's invitational in nature. Thank you, Colleen. Beautiful. Final thoughts from you, Deb?
Well, it just is resonating with me that when we lead large teams, I think it's easy to fall into the trap of everybody gets the same thing. So just again, back to being extremely intentional, and I think having that deep conversation so that you really do understand what the person needs from you, rather than just believing you know.
I love it. I love it because my sense is I believe I know plenty, and I start going down that particular pathway, and I get myself in trouble. That's not a learning pathway. That's a knowing pathway, and boy, do I get stuck. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, let me invite you guys to take a good couple, 3 minutes for yourselves and do a little journaling. We laid a few concepts on the table today. Certainly this idea of growth and development of gardening and relationships, and thinking about how the world occurs to us, is really important because it doesn't occur to all of us in the same way. And remember, leading self first is absolutely what we are focusing on. So as you take a couple of minutes to reflect, let me invite you to use this opportunity to think about what's resonating with you. Of all these little sets of conversations that you've been having among myself and my two friends, colleagues, please talk a little bit to yourself, or if you're with somebody, talk with that person about what's resonating with you. What kind of, wow, that's interesting. Resonation is something that's truly interesting, or you're curious about it, or you're surprised by it. You know, what's resonating with you, and why? What's resonating with you and why? We'll be back to you in a few minutes. Enjoy your time, and of course, you control this, so you come back to us when you're ready. Thank you. Well, let's move forward and start talking about our leadership responsibilities. In order to lead myself well, I have some responsibilities, and here are a couple of them. These I will develop experientially and then let you guys weigh in on what happens. This first one has to do with 9 dots, and I'm sure you can see these 9 dots, and this is an activity that I have participated in time and time again, and sometimes I remember it and sometimes I don't, which is really also interesting about me. You know, but if you haven't seen this before, I'm going to invite you to do this. Take your pen or pencil, make 9 dots on a piece of paper that look just like that, or close as you can, and here's your challenge. Connect the 9 dots with 4 straight lines without taking your pen or pencil from the paper. And Deb and Colleen, I know you've seen it before, but I would invite you to do the same thing again, just to physically feel yourself moving through the activity, and I'll do the same here. So let's connect those 9 dots with 4 straight lines without taking your pen or pencil from the paper. So, Colleen, Deb, and all of you that are listening to us, enjoy this couple of moments to try and make that happen. And if you've done it before, do it again. Enjoy. Welcome back, everybody. It seems to me anytime I do this, it takes me a few seconds to find my way again, although I have done this before. However, the way it works is you start at any one of the corners, and you pull yourself outside of the furthest dot. You draw back in again. You come over with your third line, and then back out through the center with your fourth. So there's our 9 dots activity. And if you can remember back to this, Colleen and Deb, what happened to you the first time that you played with this crazy picture and you were forced to draw your picture and, quote, go outside the dots, end quote? Colleen, what happened to you back then?
Well, I remember just thinking, I mean, people say think outside of the box, right? And to me, that's kind of esoteric. And I was like, well, what does that mean? But I almost had a deja vu because I continued to try and figure out a way not to take my, my pen off the paper and to draw these straight lines, staying within the confines of the dots. And it wasn't until I kind of gave myself a little bit of space and time, walked away, grabbed another piece of paper so I could try it fresh again after my multiple attempts, that I started to think, if I go way out here, then I can come, all the way down the figure and go slightly beyond those dots. It was almost like it was a boundary that I felt like I couldn't go past. And once I kind of decided that was myself imposing that boundary because that wasn't in the instructions, the light went on and boom, then I made it happen.
Wonderful. The idea that we self-impose limitations is really probably the biggest learning you just gave me. Just to remind myself, I do it to myself. And when you think about the box, many people have me in a box. Oh, this is how Ray is. Well, as soon as they tell me how I am, they're defining my 9 dots. They're saying, here's the box Ray lives. This is how Colleen is. This is how Deb is. This is how that leader is. This is how our president is. This is how our last president was. And whenever we do that, it is a way that makes the world sane to us. It keeps us inside some parameters so we don't feel like everything's moving around a little too quickly and I begin to feel mildly schizophrenic or potentially paranoid. So this idea that we put things in 9 dots is very normal. It's normal for us to try and see things. Our Indian shaman, for example, he couldn't see those boats, those vessels, until he could put them in some type of context or framework. So lots of times when we create a context or framework, we're creating 9 dots. But 9 dots, and you hit a big one, there are self-limitations. Like, so Colleen, how good are you at singing? How good are you at dancing? How good are you at shoveling snow? How good are you at calculus? How good are you at French literature? Anything you say defines your 9 dots, and it puts you inside that little box. Colleen, thank you, thank you, thank you. Deb, what are you thinking about this 9 dot experience?
Well, mostly building on both you and Colleen. I think the first time I did it, I eventually got it, just like Colleen, but it was an eventual thing. Now, I remember laughing because you had to go outside the box. And so just building on what you've already stated, we really do limit our thinking about ourselves, about others, just about possibilities. So it's so interesting about this limited thinking. I think we've even talked about this before, Ray. People who, let's say you've never had any money and you've always spent money. Well, even if you win the lottery, you have the likelihood of behaving in such a way because of your limited thinking that you'll eventually not have money again. So it's just so interesting how we get trapped in our minds and our thought processes, and how it has such a limiting result.
Oh, and it does. You just nailed it, Deb. The idea is that we limit ourselves by the way that we think. So if we give somebody a lot of money because they all of a sudden won the lottery, or possibly a relative passed and they got a lot of money, but their mentality, their 9 dots is I'm poor, within a short period of time, they're going to be poor again, unless something shifts inside of those 9 dots, unless their thinking shifts, they will end up back in that same place again. Deb, that was excellent. Thank you, thank you. Those of you at home, take a little bit of time and respond to this. What are some of the things that you say about yourself that hold you in 9 dots. Now, there could be something wonderful or it could be something limiting. It's up to you. All we end up wanting people to notice in a leadership environment, as you listen to people, you can really hear them limit themselves by their thinking, because their thinking, it comes out in their words. I can do this, I can't do that. My best example that you can start your writing around was a parent one day who came to me and said, my daughter cannot do mathematics. I need you to take her out of the advanced mathematics program. And I say, well, help me understand why your daughter can't do math. And the woman said, well, I couldn't either. So she was absolutely, thoroughly convinced, 9 dots, that she had a genetic predisposition to not being able to do mathematics. Isn't that interesting? And that she had transferred that gene to her daughter. I did my absolute level best as someone who truly cared about her and her kid to say this is not genetic, and I'm not so sure I convinced her. However, her 9 dots were very strong, that she has a gene that defines her mathematic capability. So enjoy your writing for a couple of minutes. How have the 9 dots, or the boxes we built for ourselves, affected you over time, or those that you care for? Welcome back. I hope you've enjoyed chatting with yourself about your 9 dots and the boxes that we have for each other. The next leadership responsibility that we invite people to practice is one that I personally love. It is, for me, was a hard one to get my arms around, because focus was important to me. And if I could focus well, I thought, well, I would just be always successful. So I did learn through this experience that in a system, things that enable can also disable. So the second leadership responsibility is best depicted by this drawing. And I'd like you to look at the drawing very carefully and see if you can find for me an old lady. And once you find the old lady, then I would like you to find the young lady. But I'm curious to see which one popped out at you first. So let me start with my friend Deb. Deb, which one popped out first?
Actually, this time the young, and I've seen this before, so it was so interesting because the young lady popped right out. But in the past, I have seen the old lady first.
Where is the young lady, Deb?
Well, if you look straight on, it looks like the young lady has turned her face away from you, and at the outer left edge of the picture you can see just a little bit of her nose, and the main part would be her ear, and then her hair flowing under the hat.
Backward, yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Excellent. What did you see first, Colleen? Colleen?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I saw the young woman as well, perhaps because that's what I see inside myself.
And you are a young woman, Colleen.
So why did I see the old lady then? This is not good, right?
And I had to work to see the old lady. It took me a few minutes. Once I had locked on, right, to the young lady, I was like, all right, where's the old lady? And now that I have identified the old lady, that's the only thing I see.
Well, help us see the old lady. Where is the old lady, Colleen?
Sure. What helped me was I focused on, when you're looking at the young lady, focus on her ear, because her ear actually becomes the old lady's eye. So if you focus on her eye, then you'll notice the old woman's nose is actually the young lady's chin. And from there you go down to the neck line is actually, of the young lady, is actually the old lady's chin. So if you notice, begin with the eye, and then everything kind of comes and surfaces and comes into place for the old lady.
Oh, that's great. That is great. That is great. So yeah, so there sits the old lady and the young lady. The interesting thing about this, and this builds our second leadership responsibility, is the following. When we see the young lady, we lock out the old lady, and vice versa. So the second big concept is that when we lock on to one idea, we tend to lock out others. So this ability for us to be flexible and to see and look for different things, different ideas, different perspectives, helps us deal with this second huge leadership responsibility that we have to recognize. When we lock onto one idea, we lock out others. So the first one, 9 dots, be careful of the, the places where we kind of define ourselves, put ourselves in a box. The second one, once we kind of lock onto one idea, we tend to lock out others. And if I lock onto the idea that I can't sing, I lock out the possibility that I can. Or I end up singing well for a second until it comes to my own conscious perspective, and then it changes. Quick story about locking on and locking out. Many, 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 many years ago, when I was a new coach, I was coaching a women's basketball team. And we were in a very tight ball game with only a couple of minutes to go, and the other coach took a timeout. And my kids came to the side. I didn't have much to say to them. In those days, I didn't know much about what it meant to coach, and I wasn't so sure. Mostly, I just did rah-rah stuff. Anyway, they come to the sideline, and right before they came to the other coach called the timeout. One of our kids, one of our starters, was fouled, so she was going to go to the foul line and shoot 2 foul shots. One of the kids on the bench said to her, "Hey, you're shooting foul shots great tonight. You hardly ever shoot them that good." And this player locks eyes with that kid from the bench and goes, "Oh, you're right." She was locked on to one idea that she had 2 foul shots to make and nothing else. Now she started to lock out the possibility she was going to make a couple of foul shots and started to realize, oh my God, I don't shoot foul shots that well. That's not really what I'm good at. Therefore, she went to the foul line and she, in coach's language, bricked both of them, meaning she threw the ball up there like it was a brick and it bounced off the backboard hard as it could both times. Did not make either shot because she locked out one idea for another. Isn't that interesting? Colleen, how about you as a coach? This probably is nothing new to you.
Yeah, it is. It's nothing new from that perspective, and I'm also thinking teaching as well. It's nothing new from that perspective. Sometimes you hear kids say, like you mentioned, I'm not good at math. Or I have this one child, and he just said, you know what, I'm not a good reader. And when I sat down and worked with him, he loved reading. He flourished. He would be the first one running to go grab a book and recommending book to others. And yet he had locked on to the fact that he wasn't a good reader. And unfortunately, his effort was there, but his grade wasn't. So interestingly enough, I think sometimes wherever he got that from, that was his thinking, and it definitely reflected in his in the grade that he was receiving in that area. So interesting how
sure.
that self-limiting piece, he was kind of hampering his success.
Beautiful. That's just so apparent in school settings all the time. I've even had people tell me this particular class isn't as good as the rest of the classes I've had. And rather than talking about, doing something about it, they just locked onto the fact they're not as good, and therefore they won't perform as well on this. They're going to end up less able to take a quality step forward. So interesting. We lock onto one idea, we lock out others. Deb, I know you have a potpourri of examples of this among people, for yourself, but also among people that you've led.
Oh, yes, I do. And, one thing I would love to build on is that lock on, lock out is just as, I'll just say, damaging or potentially harmful as we look to others and maybe even look at a situation. So, it is very true that it's self-limiting, but it's also other-limiting because I might see somebody in a certain way. So I do have a quick story for the power of this lock on, lock out, because when I first heard it from you, Ray, many, many years ago, I'm thinking to myself, well, you know what, I'm a good observer. I felt like I had a good reflection on myself, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I bought into it 100%. Mm-hmm. But since then, I have been able to see so many examples. So I want to share a really powerful one with you and Colleen and the audience. I was at a large leadership meeting probably 3-4 years ago, and it was being run by an educator. And he asked us to participate, and there were about 80, 90 people in the room, asked us all to participate in watching a video. And, of course, we're very competitive people, and he asked us to count the number of dribbles in between about or 5 basketball players on the video. So you have a video, 4 or 5 basketball players there, and they're dribbling, and I guess dribbling is the wrong word, and that's probably why I actually did quite well on the test. I don't understand anything in sport. So that's a little bit of a digression, but I'll go back. So what they were doing is they were actually passing the ball to each other, but occasionally they would pass it and it would hit the ground, and other times they would just pass it through the air. And we were to count the number of passes, and at the end, whoever got the closest would win something. So, of course, we're all, glued to the television screen, the large screen. So about 2 or 3 minutes into it, I'm watching, and actually I've become distracted because I had totally lost the whole concept of the passing and what was really a pass and what wasn't. And about a minute and a half, 2 minutes into it, a gorilla, a person in a gorilla suit, passes through all 4 basketball players and does kind of a little, like a Hercules or the Hulk type of movement, and then moves on. Well, I start laughing out loud. And by the way, part of the instruction is please be attentive and do not distract the people around you. Well, I was the only person in the room laughing, and then I remembered quickly, oh my gosh, now I'm not following the rules. So I was very quiet, even though I thought this chimpanzee or gorilla or whatever it was extremely funny. When we finished, they just said, now what were the counts, etc. So, somebody won. It was really exciting. And then they said, did you notice anything interesting during that 2-3 minute video? And I raised my hand and say, I thought the gorilla was very interesting. And people are like looking at me like, what are you talking about? And I said, yeah, well, they said, Deb, stand up. What did you see? I said, well, I saw this gorilla pass through. And people were laughing at me. So I'm thinking, how could you not have seen it? So what they ended up doing is they ended up playing the entire video again. Of course, at this time, nobody was trying to count the passes. And everybody in the audience, as the gorilla passed through, and it was so blatantly right there in front of us, the gorilla passes through, does this little, Hulk movement. He maintained presence there 3-4 seconds, and then walked on. The audience was just astounded that they were concentrating so much, and right there in front of them was this very unique situation that they failed to see. So it's a little bit like the Pilgrim's Landing or the ship's landing, and sometimes if you're not looking for something or not just being open, I was never looking for the gorilla, but I was more open and present because I'd really given up on the counting. I believe I think had I continued to count just like everyone else, I would have also not seen the gorilla. So just a thought there, that locking on really it has a very, very powerful effect of us failing. It's not that we refuse to see it, but failing to see some very obvious things sometimes.
Great language. What a wonderful story. I have seen the video. It's hysterical. And that manipulation about lock onto this idea, lock onto this thing, and you're coached to do it, and you lock out other things, unless you're Deb, and I don't really care that they're dribbling or passing. I don't know what they're doing. Whatever they're doing, it's not all that interesting. Therefore, I wasn't really locked on to the one thing, and now I have seen something else that unfolded. And I want to quickly say, the ability to lock on has positive side effects. That's how people achieve certain goals. There's nothing, we're not in any way demeaning the capacity that a human being has to lock onto something. It can be very useful. The invitation to you as leaders and to me as a leader is to notice that when I lock onto one idea, I lock something else out. And that's just the deal. That is just the deal. It doesn't make it good or bad. It's just the deal. Colleen, final thoughts on our gorilla or our old lady?
I just think it's such a powerful exercise. And so, just want to encourage other people to use that, because I think once you go through that activity, it truly brings that lock on, lock off. Gives you a good, how should we say, it really brings it home. So it gives you adds to your PPK and gives you a good context of learning, so it makes it easier to see in yourself next time it occurs.
Oh, sure. That's excellent, Colleen. In fact, I wasn't even going to use this one, but now that you said that, I will. If you remember in our last session, I told you that story about the coach who was locked on to the idea that the quarterback couldn't throw and the receivers couldn't catch. He was locked on to that. Therefore, he locked out anytime they were actually throwing the ball well or catching the ball in practice. He locked that out because he was focused on to the idea that their abilities were limited. They couldn't throw, they couldn't catch. Therefore, I'm locked on to that one particular place. And he built for himself 9 dots about how his kids could win, about how we could accomplish this goal, about how we can get to the next place, about how we can go on vacation as a family, about how I can achieve these quarterly results or receive this celebration reward, whatever it might be. And sometimes when I lock onto one idea, I lock out other possibilities. And if I'm not actually getting where I want to get to in the quarter, in the moment, in the ball game, in the family, for the vacation, whatever, I might need to take a deep breath and see and ask myself what I might be locking out. Because there may be a whole nother way to achieve, win, and succeed. 9 dots, lock on, lock out. Those are our first 2 personal responsibilities. Let me invite you at home to take a minute and respond to this and say, very easy one this time. What have you locked onto that's been useful? And at the same time, what did it make you lock out of? What did you miss as a result of locking on to something? We'll come back to you in just a few moments. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we are now moving on to our third and final leadership responsibility for this segment. And I'm going to show you a sentence that starts with finish files in just a moment. And as I show you that sentence, I'm going to ask you to read it as quickly as you can. And just read it quick, and if you would, please don't copy it down or write it down or take a picture of the slide. Just read it quickly, and then I'm gonna change the slide back to this one because I want to do a little experiment with you. So when I say go, or actually when the slide appears, read the sentence to yourself as quickly as possible. Please don't write it down, don't record it, don't take a picture of it. Just read it as quickly as you possibly can. Go. Thank you. In just a moment, I'm going to put the picture back up there again of that sentence. And I know it was quick, so be not afraid. It's coming back. This time, I want you to read it also, but I would like you to focus on something. I would like you to count the number of letter Fs, just the word F, you know, like Foxy begins with an F and friend begins with an F, just the Fs. Fabulous begins with an F, you know, 5. So for this next piece, I just want you to count the letter Fs that appear in the sentence as quickly as you can, but it's only going to be on for a few seconds. Ready, set, go. Good. Now, most of you, as we've gone through this experiment, probably 1,000 times now, Deb, wouldn't you say? But we've been through it many, many times. The responses begin here. Somebody will say, I saw 2 or 3. Someone found 4. Someone found 5. Sometimes somebody finds 6 or 7, who knows? But there's all these responses that we get. So whatever you found is probably just fine for you. So very quickly, verify your response of 2 or 3 or 4. Find those Fs. Now, those of you that have found, you know, 3, 4, maybe even 5, which is sometimes possible, I would like to shift your attention slightly. And this time, as you count the letter Fs, I want you to go ahead and count the number of ofs, OFs, that are in the sentence. And all of a sudden, surprisingly, we go from 3, maybe 4, to 6. This is because we have certain kind of an interesting way we see the world, a reticular activating system helps us see the world, through our experience. And sometimes we block things out. We create a blind spot. And our experience is that only 10 or 12% of the audiences that we from actually seeing the entire sentence, seeing the entire scene, seeing the entire environment. So, I'll start with you, Colleen. What are you thinking about blind spots and scotomas? How is that experiment landing on you?
Oh, well, I enjoyed that experiment, and I've participated in that, and as well as used it when I've been facilitating. And I think it's always amazing because people are certain that they've got the right number. They've counted it. They've got 4. They've got 5. And I think it's always interesting once we slow down, take a step back, retreat, right, and reevaluate, that everyone comes up with a different conclusion. So I think that it's a very powerful way just to get us to slow down and once again open our perspective and consider others' opinions, other viewpoints, because if we see what we see, and that's just based on our background and who we are, and the value is when you can also take that step back and listen to others and consider other viewpoints and perspectives.
Sometimes another person's viewpoint is actually developed through a scotoma. So a quick story about scotoma. I did this exercise, it has to be 20 years ago. So Deb, it might even be before I met you. And it was a group of, I think they were mostly men. I think they were all men. And they were in pretty high profile leadership positions. It was a hospital experience, I think. And they all were either COO, CEO of a hospital or a hospital group. So I do the experiment, and at the end of this, I did it with cards. They each had a card, and I was really tricky. They all had different colored cards, so I was kind of, although the sentence was the same, the cards had different colors. So at the end of this, I said, well, who found 3? And this one guy said, there's 3. I go, there's 3. He goes, there's 3. No more. No more, no less. 3. There's absolutely 3. And I said, what would it take for me to convince you that there's more than 3? He reached in his pocket and took out his wallet, and he said, you can have every dollar in here. I'm telling you, there's 3. And I'm thinking, this is fun. This is another revenue stream, And then I showed him the ofs, and he just about died. It was so funny. However, we get so sure, we lock on to what we think is so, we sometimes make our scotoma even stronger. Because I had him look at it 2 or 3 more times, and he kept saying, no, there's 3, because he kept locking out, created a blind spot, a scotoma, toward those ofs that were there. Deb, how you doing with this one?
Oh, and in fact, Ray, this one took me back, but I like Colleen, have participated in it several times and facilitated with it several times. And you're right, my participation's been more where we had separate cards, and I think that part of the instruction where we were not to just look at your own card. Don't necessarily look at anybody else's. And the belief system that I embedded in myself quite early in that exercise was, well, I have a different card, because when other people were saying 2 and 3, it was kind of bizarre because I had 6, but I'm a fairly literal person, and when you say count the F's, I just did exactly that. But, and then I was so proud that I had the one card in the room with 6 on it. So it's so interesting how we tie not only our thinking, but potentially even our, I don't want to say self-worth, but there's a little ego in there that, oh, I had the card with 6. Only to find that everybody was looking, eventually that we found that everyone was actually looking at the same card. But I love this because it ties back so nicely to how do you see it differently? Because we're all possibly seeing the same thing or looking at the same thing, but seeing something dramatically different. And to your point, not making it right or wrong, just how valuable is that to not get too tied into your own perception, but checking in with others. Obviously this is very literal in that there are 6, but in most situations in the world, it's really much more a matter of perception and what others are seeing.
Yeah, I love this. And see, the problem with scotomas is not that they live in the world. They do live in the world. The issue for us, and we can make this a problem, but we have to recognize that we are filled with scotomas. And one of the things we can do is work on ourselves. If our first leadership responsibility is taking care of ourselves, we need to recognize that scotomas are in us. And we need to make sure that we understand when we lock onto one idea, we lock out others. And when we lock out these other ideas, we have a tendency to build 9 dots or a box for ourselves. These 3 leadership responsibilities, 9 dots or box thinking, locking on, locking out, old lady, young lady, the story about the gorilla, I mean, these are just magnificent. The coach who locked on to the fact they couldn't catch and couldn't throw, then like was surprised when they started catching and throwing well. And finally, the fact that scotomas are a natural part of the world. It is absolutely a natural part of the world, and that they're not a problem. We need to recognize that they live in us and that we have scotomas, which allows us to move forward. So gang, we're going to come to primary leadership focus in a moment, but before we do, let me give you an opportunity to say, okay, what was my greatest learning from learning these 3 responsibilities? 9 dots, lock on, lock out, and scotomas. What is my greatest learning about this and why? Enjoy your writing time. We'll be back to you in just a couple of minutes. Put us on pause. See you soon. Welcome back, everybody. This is coming to the end of our section, and we felt that we would be remiss if we didn't at least talk about using these leadership responsibilities to maintain a focus. And our argument is deep that our number 1 primary leadership focus should be on the vision. What is your team, the enterprise, this community, what are we trying to accomplish? It is almost like when we hold a meeting, have a gathering, we use our leadership responsibilities, 9 dots, scotomas, locking on, locking out, to help people learn how to make meaning out of what the vision is for the system. The system is moving toward a desired future state. What is that desired future state, and how do I fit in? Now, how do I fit in is going to come back to us in just a little while when we do session 4, but really being highly intentional as a leader to keep the primary leadership focus alive in all settings. Anytime you have a meeting, even a one-on-one conversation, it's an opportunity to keep the leadership focus alive and well. So without any further ado, Deb, how about you weigh in first, this sense of keeping the vision alive? How does that resonate with you?
Oh, Ray, I love that one. Sometimes we just, as people, can get mired down into the details. And to your point around locking on, locking out, and the 9 dots, et cetera, we just, we're focused on the everydayness. And while that's very important, that continual visiting of the higher purpose or the vision is something that I think is invaluable. And if people just continue to be tied to the vision, then the everydayness, there's kind of it's more than the daily activities. It's really why you're doing things. And to me, that's what generates excitement and joy and energy. And yet, it's so easily lost if it's not repeated and discussed on a regular basis.
Deb, thank you so much. This is almost like a litany that I go through for myself when I start with a client or I go to give a keynote or something like that. And one of my parts of that is to enable a group to be successful, find out what I need to do to be in service. But I can't be in service to a team. I can't be the guide on the side if I don't understand what they're trying to accomplish. So making sure I know that allows me to be an even more effective guide on the side, a more effective facilitator, a more effective servant who is in service to that group of people to enable them to accomplish the vision that they care about. That was just absolutely gorgeous. Loved it, loved it. And Colleen, how about you? What are you thinking about this vision piece?
Yeah, just kind of building upon to what Deb said, I think sometimes we do get mired down in the day-to-day. We get mired down in the results. We've got a number we're trying to hit, right? And so our energy, sometimes we begin to, our conversation shifts, and sometimes we lead with structure. And I think that's that tendency, because we want to talk about this new thing
Sure.
that's hopefully going to help us support our efforts in getting to this number, perhaps, that we're all working towards. And I think sometimes the importance is to remember, lead with the vision. Then there's that vision, and there's an opportunity of the conversation to co-create together, perhaps modify structures. Perhaps there's some structures that are getting in your way. But if you lead with structure and focus on that piece, I think you have the tendency to miss the opportunity of the larger picture.
Well said, well said. And actually, this is something Deb and Colleen, we've chatted about, and listeners, I want you to look forward to this very brief little webinar, but it's going to be fun, where it talks about the fact that a target is not the vision. A target is evidence that we're moving toward a vision. We're moving toward a desired future state. And very often people get stuck in number, stuck in the target, and they start to fall in love with the structures that are going to hopefully generate that target. Rather than talking more deeply and not locking onto the structure and the target, but saying, okay, will these structures really be the best design that will allow us to move toward the vision we're trying to create? A target just helps me understand that there's some evidence unfolding that we are moving toward a vision. But that's something that I want you guys, listeners, to look forward to, because that's something I want Deb and Colleen to put together for you. It's just so important, and they've got truckloads of examples of when we get lost on the target and we miss the vision. We lose our way toward the vision. Outstanding stuff, Colleen. Thank you so much. Deb and Colleen, any final thoughts on primary leadership focus?
No, I think I'm good.
I was going to say, Colleen, I'll let you go first, but you're good. Ray, I would just say that these three pieces that you've shared with us today just are fabulous tools to help us see and notice things, and to your point, not make a judgment around them. They exist in the world, and to share with teams, etc. Because I think there are very powerful ways of explaining a natural law or a phenomena that we all have, but we may not be evident to us. So we started talking earlier today about point out, the guide by the side that's pointing out. I think these three tools that you shared today are fabulous assists or tools for that guide to the side. Thank you. And it was a wonderful discussion.
Oh, thank you so much, Deb. And I think this woman who closes out our session here in this particular piece, I see her as a leader, a guide on the side, someone who's really working on enabling other people to learn and to help them accomplish what they wish to accomplish. This sense of building capacity is absolutely critical in this world of conversational leadership and leading in the 21st century. But we can only build capacity when people recognize they need to and that they want to. This is such a distinction between I have to do something versus I choose to do this because it's going to move me toward a vision that I care about. To be really capable of doing this, as always, we at JLC invite you to work on 3 levels. The conversation is the relationship. Relationships enable high-quality results, and reflection is one of the ways that we actually can put into long-term memory PPK. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us today. Remember that a JLC facilitator has some very simple intentions. We try not to advocate, but inquire. We try not to argue, but explore. We try not to convince, but discover. And we try very hard not to present, but as you've noticed all through these sessions, we try to ask questions. Thank you so much. I hope you have some time to reflect in your learning journals, and we'll see you again very, very soon for session 4. Take care.